Richard Lawson was a man who had everything people dream of: wealth, respect, power, and a luxurious life. He owned several businesses, drove the latest cars, and lived in a mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. But behind all that luxury was a lonely father with a shattered heart. 2 years ago, Richard's life had taken a cruel turn when his only son, Ethan, was in a terrible car accident. The boy survived, but the tragedy left him paralyzed from the waist down. Since that day, nothing was the same. The once cheerful house had turned silent. Ethan, who used to laugh and play in the garden, now spent most of his time in a wheelchair, barely speaking to anyone. Richard tried everything: doctors, therapies, expensive machines, but nothing brought back his son's spirit. The guilt consumed him every night, knowing he'd been driving the car the day of the accident. To make matters worse, no nanny or caretaker stayed for long. Some couldn't handle Ethan's silence, others couldn't handle Richard's perfectionism. He had hired more than 10 nannies in a year, and all had quit. Richard told himself it was fine. He didn't trust anyone easily anyway, but deep down, he was afraid that Ethan would never find joy again. Then one morning, a young woman named Grace Carter showed up for an interview. She wasn't dressed fancy like the others. Her clothes were simple, her smile calm. Richard glanced at her resume, unimpressed. She had no experience working for wealthy families, just time spent volunteering at children's hospitals. But something in her eyes, kindness mixed with quiet strength, made him pause. When she met Ethan for the first time, she didn't talk to him like a patient or a child to pity. She knelt down to his level, smiled gently, and said, "Hi, Ethan. I'm Grace. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to be your friend." Ethan didn't respond, but Richard noticed something strange. His son didn't turn away this time. For a brief second, Ethan's eyes softened, almost curious. Watching them, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, this simple, soft-spoken woman could bring a little light back into their dark, broken world. The first few days with Grace were quiet but steady. Unlike the previous nannies, she didn't force Ethan to talk or participate in activities. She simply stayed near him, reading stories aloud, humming soft tunes, or sometimes just sitting by the window while he painted with his limited hand movement. Richard watched from a distance, unsure what to think. Grace's methods seemed simple, almost too gentle for a boy who hadn't spoken a full sentence in months. But something about her presence felt different. One morning, Richard walked past Ethan's room and froze. He heard faint laughter, soft, hesitant, but real. When he peeked inside, he saw Grace pretending to draw a silly picture of herself on Ethan's sketchpad, making exaggerated faces as she did. Ethan was trying not to smile, but a small laugh escaped him. It was the first time Richard had seen that spark in his son's eyes since the accident. His heart tightened, emotions rushing through him, relief, guilt, and gratitude all at once. As the days passed, Grace introduced new things to Ethan. She brought a small keyboard and taught him how to press keys using a light finger brace. At first, Ethan struggled, frustration showing on his face. But Grace never lost patience. "We'll go one note at a time," she'd say with a warm smile. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try." Eventually, Ethan began playing small tunes. The sound of piano keys echoing through the house replaced the silence that had once haunted its halls. Even the staff seemed happier, inspired by the boy's slow recovery. One evening, Richard returned home late and heard music coming from the living room. He followed the sound and found Grace sitting beside Ethan at the piano. Ethan's fingers trembled as he pressed the keys, but he was smiling, truly smiling. Grace clapped softly, encouraging him. Richard stood by the doorway, his throat tightening. He wanted to thank her, but the words wouldn't come. He just watched in silence, realizing that Grace hadn't just reached Ethan. She had brought warmth back into a house that had forgotten how to feel alive. That night, for the first time in years, Richard slept peacefully, the sound of Ethan's laughter echoing in his mind. Weeks passed, and the Lawson mansion no longer felt like a house full of grief. There was laughter again, soft, genuine, and healing. Grace had become more than just a nanny. She was like a guardian angel for Ethan. She helped him paint, play, and even read bedtime stories, something Richard hadn't done since the accident. Ethan began calling her Miss G, and whenever she entered the room, his eyes lit up. Richard noticed the transformation in his son and couldn't help but feel grateful. But something about Grace intrigued him. She always smiled, always stayed positive, yet there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, something she never spoke about. One night after Ethan had fallen asleep, Richard found her sitting alone in the garden under the moonlight. Her usual smile was gone. He approached gently. "Grace, I've been meaning to ask. You've done more for my son than anyone. Why? Why do you care so much?" Grace hesitated, then took a deep breath. Because I know what it's like to lose hope," she whispered. "I once had a younger brother, Noah. He was only 12 when he got into an accident. And he couldn't move from the neck down. My parents couldn't afford proper care, and I was too young to help. He passed away a year later." Richard's eyes softened. Grace continued, tears glistening in her eyes. "When I saw Ethan for the first time, I saw my brother's face. The same pain, the same fear. I couldn't save Noah, but maybe I can help Ethan live the life my brother never got." For a long moment, Richard couldn't speak. He felt something shift inside him, a deep understanding. Grace wasn't just doing her job. She was healing her own scars through his son. "Grace," he said quietly, "you've done more than heal Ethan. You've healed me too." She looked at him in surprise, and for the first time, Richard smiled sincerely. From that night onward, the bond between the three of them grew stronger. Ethan began to regain confidence. Richard spent more time at home, and Grace became a part of their family in every way that mattered. But none of them knew. The greatest miracle was yet to come. Months passed, and life at the Lawson mansion bloomed with new energy. Ethan was no longer the quiet, withdrawn boy he once was. Every morning, laughter echoed through the halls as he practiced piano or painted with Grace. Richard, too, had changed. He began spending more time with his son, canceling business meetings just to be home for dinner. For the first time in years, they felt like a family again. Grace continued her gentle but firm therapy sessions with Ethan. She encouraged him to push his limits, always believing he could achieve more. "Your body may be weak," she'd say, "but your spirit isn't, and that's where healing begins." Ethan worked hard, his determination stronger than ever. Even when his muscles ached, he refused to give up. Grace's faith in him became his strength. One crisp morning, Richard walked into the living room expecting to see Ethan painting. Instead, he froze in disbelief. There, in the middle of the room, Ethan was standing, his small hands gripping the edge of a table for balance, his legs trembling but holding him upright. Grace knelt beside him, her eyes full of tears, whispering, "You're doing it, Ethan, you're standing." Richard's heart raced. For a moment, time stood still. Then Ethan turned toward his father, smiling through tears. "Dad, look, I can do it." Richard's vision blurred as he rushed forward, dropping to his knees and wrapping his arms around his son. "I'm so proud of you," he choked out, unable to hold back his emotions. "You did it, son. You really did it." Grace stepped back quietly, tears streaming down her face. She had witnessed many small victories with Ethan, but this moment, seeing him stand for the first time, was beyond anything she had dreamed. As father and son held each other, Richard looked up at Grace. "We couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice trembling. Grace smiled softly. "You both healed each other. I just helped you find the strength you already had." From that day on, the Lawson mansion was filled with warmth, love, and laughter once more. Richard realized that the greatest miracles don't come from money or medicine. They come from compassion, hope, and the courage to never give up.